Chapter 7 Spear of Destiny. In Texas, video games made the long list of evils. Games were bad, corrupting the kids, causing them to blow their milk money on nonsense. So the uptight citizens of Mesquite, a small town just southeast of Dallas, took their cause to the courts. They wanted the games banned. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ultimately shot the Texans down. This was in 1982. The games at the center of the debate were arcade hits like Pac-Man, the very machine that arrived on the truck when id Software, Mesquite's first gaming company, pulled into town on April Fool's Day, 1992. Carmack and Romero couldn't have been happier to be in the heat again. Everything in Dallas was big. The highways were big, the trucks were big, the car dealerships were big, even the people were big. From the towering cowboys to the statuesque blondes. It settled on Mesquite to be near Scott Miller, who ran Apogee from his hometown of Garland, just a few minutes up the road. Mesquite, as it so happened, had what the guys considered a suitably killer place to live. La Prada Apartments off Interstate 635 boasted sprawling lofts with 10-foot black windows overlooking crystal blue swimming pools and gardens. When it arrived, women in bikinis lounged by the pools. The sweet, tangy smell of barbecue floated up from the grills. Water polo balls flew over the nets. They were home. Scott was thrilled to have his star gamers as neighbors. He and his partner, George Broussard, took them out for a big Tex-Mex dinner of burritos and nachos. Then off to Speed Zone, a big arcade for go-kart racing and games. The id guys chased each other around the track in their Formula One model cars. Afterward, they admired the authentic sports cars being driven by Scott and George. Apogee was clearly reaping the rewards of Keen's continued success. "Oh man," Romero told Carmack. "They're driving badass cars while we drive ass cars. It's time for us to kick ass." There was plenty of reason for them to succeed. In addition to the guarantee of $100,000, Scott upped their royalty up to 50%, an unheard of in the industry. He was eager to keep the boys happy. He had made other concessions too. He knew they hated their obligation to Softdisk. In order to let id focus on Wolfenstein, he told them that Apogee would create a game to fulfill the Softdisk contract. Unbeknownst to Softdisk, the next game they received, Scuba Venture, came not from id Software, but from Apogee. Scott had increasingly big plans for Wolfenstein. At the moment, the idea was to follow their existing shareware formula. Release one episode containing 10 levels, for free, then charge gamers to receive the remaining 2 episodes. After talking with Romero and Tom, Scott learned that it was taking the group only about 1 day to make a level of the game. Ka-ching! $signs. Instead of just 3 episodes, why not have 6? Scott said, "If you can do 30 more levels, it would only take you 15 days, and we could have it where people could buy the first trilogy for $35 or get all 6 for $50. Or if people buy the first episode and later want the second episodes, it will be $20. So there's a reason to get them all." After some consideration, it agreed. Not everything about the future was looking up. The guys abruptly decided to part ways with their president, Mark Reen, after a difference of opinion. "That's fucking it," Romero declared. "Boom. He's gone." But gone too was id's one and only biz guy. Official biz guy, at least. Unofficially, of course, Carmack and Romero had been running businesses for years. Though coders by trade, they'd been working for themselves since they were teenagers. Carmack had put a team of his friends together to make Wraith. Then he managed his own freelance programming career. Romero, had grown up as one boy band, churning out dozens of titles and pawning them off to small publishers. Like most artists or programmers, however, they enjoyed doing their craft more than cutting a deal. And the more immersed they became at id, the less interested they were in handling the mountain production tasks. Paying bills, ordering supplies, fielding calls. They needed someone who could be a frontman for the company, someone as brash and iconoclastic in business as they were in game development. There certainly were plenty of candidates, as budding executives across the country began sniffing out id. But id didn't want just anyone. They wanted their old friend, Jay Wilbur. "Here's the deal," they told Jay on the phone. As id's new chief executive officer, he'd get 5% of the company and full reign to run the business side of things. All he had to do was say yes and drive the few hours from Shreveport to Dallas. Tired of soft disk and feeling that he had fulfilled his obligation to Alvacuvius, Jay agreed. "Fire up the barbecue," he told them. He was coming to Mesquite. "Dance, motherfuckers!" Romero screamed. "Lay down! Brr, brr, brr!" The SS guards were everywhere. Down the hall, under the Hitler portrait, careening by the shit buckets. And Romero was there. Dude, fucking right there. Storming down the hall with a chain gun, mowing down Nazis and running over their bloody, bony chunks of Gibbs. It was well past midnight at the id pad in the La Prada apartments. Romero was at his perch on the second floor of the loft, Adrian to his right, Tom behind him. To his left was a snarl of cables and controllers. At the moment, the office's favorite new obsession, a one-on-one brawl game called Street Fighter II, was jammed in the Nintendo. Downstairs by the kitchen, Carmack sat at his stealth black Next machine. Kevin sat to his right, Jay behind them. The floor was piled with pizza boxes. Carmack sat above a pile of empty Diet Cokes. It had only been days and id had settled in. Romero had been growing more and more enthused over Wolfenstein's progress. This was easy to tell. All one had to do was listen to the volume of his screams. Game playing, everyone was beginning to notice, was more than just a part of work for Romero. It was a part of life. He was spending much of his time testing out Wolfenstein. When he wasn't testing it himself, he was contacting gamers across the BBS world who were playtesting it for him. "Hey, you know what we should have in here?" Romero called out as he paused the game. "Pissing! We should have it so you can fucking stop and piss on the Nazi after you mow him down. That would be fucking awesome." Adrian and Tom chuckled heartily beside him. Tom reached below his desk, then hurled one of the many wads of paper at Romero. Romero, who had his own stash, responded with 3 or 4 more. 1 or 2 sailed over the loft and hit Kevin, who, as usual, responded with his own litany of paper bombs. Carmack tried to focus. Paper fights, Nazi yells, Romero's violent fantasies. They were becoming the norm since the guys had arrived in Mesquite. Carmack never participated in the revelry. No one expected him to. So far, his powers of concentration were good enough to shut out the distractions, so he could deal with the immediate problems. Optimizing the Wolfenstein engine for maximum speed and stability. Though he could tolerate the paper fights, the bigger annoyance was the push walls. Push walls were essentially secret doors in a game. The idea was that the player could run down against a wall, and if he pushed in the right spot, a portion of the wall would slide back, revealing a secret room full of goodies. Tom had been needling Carmack incessantly about adding this special feature. Secrets, he lobbied, were an essential part of every good game. There had been secrets in the early games, like the Vorticon alphabet in Keen, or the spot where Keen would moon the player if the player paused too long without doing anything. Wolfenstein was in dire need of something like that, and creating a way for players to find secret rooms through push walls seemed like a natural. But Carmack wasn't biting. It was, he said, an ugly hack. This meant that it was an elegant solution to an unnecessary problem. Making a game, writing code, for Carmack, was increasingly becoming an exercise in elegance. How to write something that achieved the desired effect in the cleanest way possible. The Wolfenstein engine simply wasn't designed to have walls sliding back into secret rooms. It was designed to have doors slide open and shut, open and shut. It was a matter of streamlining. The simpler Carmack kept his game, the faster the world would move. Therefore, the deeper the immersion. Nope, he'd say. Push walls were out. Tom didn't relent. He'd bring it up whenever he sensed an opening. Soon, Romero joined Tom's crusade. We understand that you're overloaded on programming stuff because of this new engine, Romero told Carmack. How about just this one thing? Put push walls there, and we'll be happy. We'll put them fucking everywhere. Carmack still said no. It was, notably, the first time since they had begun that the team experienced creative conflict. During the day, they took occasional breaks, playing football in the pool. One time, with Carmack out there, Romero pleaded Tom's case again. Dude, he said, we need push walls. You can't just run down these hallways and not find secret stuff. Everything you're doing is awesome. Just doing this one thing will make me and Tom really happy with the design. This is really simple design-wise. Forget about it, Carmack snapped. More new tensions began to surface. With the extra levels ordered by Scott, the id guys were putting in 16-hour-long days, 7 days a week. Kevin and Jay did ease the burden somewhat. Kevin was able to assist Adrian with the character work, as well as help out with some packaging and marketing designs. As CEO, Jay's main asset wasn't so much strategizing the company as being the office biz guy. He made sure there was enough computer paper, enough discs, enough toilet paper, enough pizza. He made sure bills got paid. One of the reasons he got the job was he was the only one who balanced his checkbook. Despite the help of Kevin and Jay, though, nothing could dissipate the reaction everyone was having to the shenanigans of Romero and Tom. They were over the top with energy. They used to jump around, bleeping and blurting, imitating sounds and characters from Keen. But now they had a microphone. Literally. Bobby Prince, their freelance sound designer, had temporarily set up camp in the id apartment, turning the loft into a miniature sound studio. With an artillery of effects and mics, Tom and Romero went overboard. They'd stay up well into the morning, recorded demented screeds. One night, they got the idea to record answering machine messages for the id phone. The first started with jazzy piano, and Romero speaking over the music. id software is brought to you today by the letter I and the number 5, he said, like at the end of Sesame Street. Tom followed by singing in a strange high voice, 5 strawberry pies. Screams and thunderclaps followed into the beep. For another, they cranked up the distortion to make them sound like the gravel voice demons. id software is not available right now, the demon belched. Because I'm eating them. In a third, Tom began by saying that he was standing in the rubble of id software. Suddenly, the demon appeared and said, Are you in any way related to id software? Tom told the demon that he was just there doing the answering machine message. Goodbye, ass, the demon bellowed, followed by a blaze of thunder, fire, and at the end, Tom's screams. Adrian got so fed up with their noise that on the night of the answering machine reveille, he simply left. Carmack, for the time being, would stay behind. Tensions were building outside the office, too. One day, Scott received a call from FormGen, with whom he had been in contact since the company decided to do a retail version of Wolfenstein. FormGen would often appeal to Scott when they were having difficulty negotiating with id. Scott had some concerns of his own, most notably that Wolfenstein was nothing more than a maze game, Pac-Man with guns. He wondered if people would see it for what it was. FormGen's latest concern, however, was even bigger. "Look, Scott," an executive said, "we don't think they should be showing blood and stirring up the World War II stuff. We're really worried about this. It's too realistic. We're going to make a lot of people upset. There's never been a game like this." "Let me see what I can do," Scott replied. He dialed id. "Hey," he said. "FormGen thinks the game needs to be toned down." He could hear the guys huffing on the other end of the line. It was time for id to do something about the violence, he conceded. "Beef it up," he said. They wholeheartedly agreed. Adrian filled the game with all kinds of gruesome details. Skeletons hanging by their wrists from chains, corpses in jail cells slumped against the bars, blood and flesh chunks randomly spotting the labyrinth walls. It was a welcome change from the art Tom was having him create for the game. Novelistic elements like pots and pans hanging in the kitchen and still-life plates of turkey dinners. Adrian, who was growing to despise the game's realism, was longing for more splatterpunk, demonic gore. He pumped in as much blood as he could. Tom and Romero upped the shock value in other ways, most notably the screams. They stayed up late into the night, recording hellish German commands and orders. "Achtung!" and "Schutzstaffel." They recorded the last words for dying Nazis. "Mutti!" Mommy, and for Hitler himself, a final goodbye to his wife. "Eva, auf Wiedersehen." To cap it off, they used a digital version of the Nazi party anthem, Horst Wessel Lied, to open the game. They also threw in something called a death cam. After the final enemy, known as the boss, of an episode got killed, a message would appear on the screen saying, "Let's see that again." Then a detailed animation would slowly play, showing the big bad boss meeting his grimly demise. This death cam was id versions of a snuff film. They decided to include a screen at the beginning of the game that would say, "This game is voluntarily rated PC-13, profound carnage." Though tongue-in-cheek, it was the first voluntary rating of a video game. With the game nearing completion, there was one major issue left unresolved: the push walls. Romero and Tom figured it was worth one last try and asked Carmack to put them in. To their surprise, he spun around in his chair and said it was already done. Carmack, in the end, agreed that it was, as he was fond of saying, the right thing to do. Secrets were fun. Tom and Romero were right. It was striking, they thought, and worth remembering. Carmack was stubborn, but if someone argued a point strongly and convincingly, he was willing to give in. Tom and Romero went to town putting in all the secrets. A player would run up to a section of wall, say, a banner of Hitler, and push by hitting the spacebar on the keyboard. Then, blam, the wall would creak back. They filled rooms with treasures and health items, turkey dinners and ammo. They even made a completely secret level based on a third-person 3D version of Pac-Man, ghosts and all. There was a psychology and a philosophy to video game secrets. Secrets rewarded the player for thinking outside the box, pushing a wall that should be solid to see if it would open. This principle also applied to cheating. Many games included what were known as cheat codes, little commands the player could type in that would give him added health items or weapons. But there was a price to pay. If a player cheated, he was disabled from posting a high score. Behavior in games, as in life, had consequences and rewards. At 4 a.m. on May 5th, 1992, the shareware episode of Wolfenstein 3D was complete. Id had wrapped up all the little finishing touches. Tom typed the backstory. You're William J. B.J. Blakowicz, the Allies' bad boy of espionage and terminal action seeker. Your mission? To infiltrate the Nazi fortress. In most games, players could choose from difficulty levels, such as easy, medium, and hard. In Wolfenstein, a player would boot up the game and see the question, "How tough are you?" Below were 4 responses. Each had an accompanying image of the player's imaged face, ranging from the hardest, "I am death incarnate," with the face of a snarling red-eyed BJ, to the easiest, "Can I play, Daddy?" which showed BJ with a baby's bonnet and pacifier. In that spirit, they added taunts that would appear to the screen when the player tried to quit. Press N for more carnage. Press Y to be a weenie. Or, for guns and glory, press N. For work and worry, press Y. Details done, errors or bugs checked, the game was ready to be uploaded to Software Creations, id's adopted home, BBS online community in Massachusetts. Gamers, already hooked on Keen, waited anxiously for the newest title to arrive. "Who knows?" Tom said. "If gamers like this Wolfenstein might do twice as well as Keen." Keen was currently number 1 on the shareware market. Carmack, Adrian, Romero, Jay, Kevin, and Scott gathered around the computer that was connected by modem to the Software Creations BBS. Crickets chirped outside. The Pac-Man machine blinked in the corner. With the hit of the button, the data file labeled Wolf 3D split into abstract bits and streamed through the telephone line out of Mesquite, out of Dallas, up through Texas, heading for New England. Okay, the guys all agreed. It was time to go to bed. They'd see what happened tomorrow. "Pizza money!" Jay hollered, opening up the first royalty check for Wolfenstein 3D. They really had no idea what they would make. Keen was bringing in about $30,000 per month. They expected at best to double that. Wolf, after all, was still being distributed through the relative underworld of shareware catalogs and BBSs, without advertising. The closest thing to marketing were the BBS techies who wrote little teasers of text about the games on their computers. But the guys certainly expected at least to break even rather soon. The game had cost, if one considered id's only overhead, the rent of the apartments, and their $750 per month salaries, roughly $25,000 to make. The check was for $100,000, and this reflected only the first month. Together with the continued sales of the Keen games, id was heading for annual sales in the millions. By releasing the first episode as shareware, they instantly hooked the gamers, leaving them craving more. It defied logic, the thought of giving something away for free. But Scott's plan had worked. Wolfenstein evolved into an underground sensation. Before the press picked up on it, the gamers online were abuzz about the game's immersive blend of high technology and gruesome gameplay. The synthesis of Carmack's and Romero's personal passions. Forums on the various BBSs and on the emerging commercial online services, Prodigy, CompuServe, and America Online, brimmed with discussion about the game. The internet's discussion forum, Usenet, was on fire. Emails poured into the office. There's no surprise that this game is the hottest download on many BBS systems and the talk of Usenet, wrote one fan. I love this game. The feeling as you round a corner at full speed and blow away 3 guards and an SS who is firing at you, then quickly pivot to take out the guy coming up from behind, is indescribable. The anticipation as you open each door and wonder what's hiding behind it is intense. One employee at Microsoft raved about how popular Wolf 3D is here at Microsoft. It seems like I can't walk down a hall without hearing, "Mein Leben," from someone's office. He also mentioned how he'd hoped id would port a version of the game for Microsoft's new operating system, Windows. By summer, the press was echoing the praise. One shareware magazine gushed that the game was more like an interactive movie than an arcade game. Another said it was single-handedly justifying the existence of shareware. Even Computer Gaming World, the industry's veteran publication, picked up on the craze, saying that this was the first time game technology capable of immersing the player in a threatening environment, a peek at part of interactive entertainment's potential for a sensory-immersed virtual future. Virtual reality, now a buzzword in the mainstream press, was a term being applied to Wolfenstein. Shareware magazines were dubbing it a virtual reality game. A Kentucky entrepreneur hooked up a version of Wolfenstein to virtual reality goggles and brought in $500 a day at the Kentucky State Fair. But players didn't need virtual reality goggles to feel immersed. In fact, the sense of immersion was so real that many began complaining of motion sickness. Calls were coming in even at the Apogee office, saying that people were throwing up while playing the game. Wolfenstein vomit stories became items of fascination online. Theories abounded. Some players thought the game's animation was so smooth that it tricked the brain into thinking that it was moving in a real space. Other gamers thought it had something to do with the jerkiness of the graphics, which induced the feeling of seasickness. Some felt it was simply disorientating because there was no acceleration involved. It was like going from 0 to 60 at light speed. Gamers even exchanged tips for how to play without losing one's Doritos. The motion sickness wasn't the only source of controversy. The violence was another. "This game certainly goes heavy on the ketchup," wrote one reviewer. "Enemies spurt great gobs of blood as you mow them down. If you're sensitive to violence in video games, this is a game to avoid at all costs." Most people weren't protesting much about shooting human beings. They were upset that players could shoot dogs. Nevertheless, it was gore they delighted in. "Wolfenstein 3D may have no socially redeeming value," one magazine wrote, "but we couldn't stop playing it." If the violence could be stomached, for some, the enemies couldn't. Jay received a letter from the Anti-Defamation League protesting the game's inclusion of swastikas and Nazis. An even bigger problem was Germany itself. Wolfenstein had made its way there online, as it had to other countries through CompuServe, which had an international presence. It didn't take long for the game to come to the attention of the German government. Germany, after World War II, had forbidden the inclusion of Nazis in popular entertainment, so Wolfenstein was banned. Apogee began receiving unopened packages containing the game. Soon, Scott started fulfilling orders by sending the games in nondescript packages. When CompuServe learned of the German ban, it pulled Wolfenstein from its service until it heard from German counsel. The move gained attention from pundits and lawyers because it was one of the first examples of the emerging legalities of cyberspace. What happens when a game or any item, image, book, film is uploaded in one country but breaks the laws of another? The Wolfenstein case prompted one lawyer to publish an article, "Nazis in Cyberspace." He found it intuitively wrong for the game to be taken down. Cyberspace, he argued, should be treated as its own independent nation. The article was illustrated by a flag with a collided snake-like mouse cord and dictum, "Don't tread on our BBS." Wolfenstein began empowering gamers in creative ways as well. They started making modifications, or mods. People, including Carmack and Romero, had been hacking into games for years. There had even been some computer games, such as the 1983 game Lode Runner, which had special programs, level editors, to allow users to create their own versions of the game. That same year, 3 fans of Silas Warner's original Castle Wolfenstein programmed a parody called Castle Smurfenstein, with Smurfs substituted for the Nazis. A game as sophisticated as id's Wolfenstein 3D was considerably more difficult to hack, requiring someone to effectively write over the original content. But not long after Wolfenstein came out, the guys at id booted up a modified version. It seemed the same except for one notable difference. The music had been replaced by the I Love You, You Love Me theme song from the children's show Barney. And instead of killing the SS boss at the end of the episode, players had to destroy the smiling purple dinosaur. Carmack and Romero couldn't have been more pleased. Others didn't feel that way. Kevin, always business-minded, was concerned over copyright issues, over the thought of people messing with their content. Scott agreed. What if people started making their own versions of the game and tried to sell them? It would cut into everyone's profits. But with Carmack and Romero wholeheartedly behind the idea of open, free, fun hacking, the issue was temporarily pushed aside. Despite their success, id didn't rest on their laurels. The work ethic, if anything, got more intense. Immediately after the Wolfenstein shareware was uploaded, the guys buckled down to complete the remaining 5 episodes. The pressure was palpable. Thousands of gamers were sending in their checks. id had to deliver the goods. When they did take a break, it was several weeks later, and the occasion was significant. Kansas City was hosting a big Apple II event. For the id guys, weaned on Apple II, it seemed like the perfect respite. An Apple Fest, after all, was kind of where Romero and had met Jay. Now they could return to show off how far they'd come. So they piled into Tom's Toyota and drove 13 hours. A brand new $7,000 laptop with Wolfenstein in the trunk. The festival was being held at a community college. All the out-of-town guests were staying in a school dormitory. Upon checking in, the id guys noticed a sign telling of a special guest speaker, Silas Warner. They looked to each other and gasped. No way! Silas was the creator of the original Castle Wolfenstein. As far as they knew, he had no idea that they had remade his game. Nervously, they filed into the lecture hall, computer in tow, and waited for him to arrive. Silas sauntered on stage like King Kong. He was a massive man, 320 pounds of gamer meat, with fingers that could crush a computer mouse with a pinch. But he was funny and articulate, telling the story of his own startup, Muse Software, the rollicking ride of its rise and fall. Silas was flocked by fans when it was over. The id guys stood in the back, holding their laptop, and waited their turn. Hey, Silas, Romero finally said breathlessly. We're id Software, and we just did a remake of Castle Wolfenstein and put it on the market, and we brought it here so you could check it out and look at it and sign our manual. Silas looked at this motley group of programmers with the fancy PC laptop and raised his brow. Oh, yes, he said slowly. I remember that someone called me about it. Eagerly, they fired up the laptop and showed him the game. To their relief, he complimented them on their work and signed autographs. Later that night, they returned to the dorm. It was a memorable night. Everyone hung out in the hallways, talking about games, checking out Wolfenstein. There were even celebrities in the Apple II community, like Burger Bill, a programmer who was known to keep a hamburger in his desk and nibble on it occasionally for days on end. But with the crowd gathering around id's laptop, it was clear that Burger Bill wasn't the only game in town. id's first taste of fame came the next month, during their first real company vacation. They had just completed all the remaining episodes of Wolfenstein and decided to celebrate by spending $5,000 each on a week-long stay at Disney World. They spent the days riding Space Mountain over and over again, checking out the action. One night, they regrouped in a hot tub at the Grand Floridian Hotel, right off the theme park. Life was good. So good, they decided, that they were going to give themselves raises when they got back. Up to what, at the time, felt like a substantial amount of money. $45,000 per year. Wolfenstein, they cheered, had done them well. "Did someone say Wolfenstein?" asked a guy in the pool nearby. He nudged his friend. "We love that game." The id guys looked at them dubiously, but the gamers were for real. They rushed over to the hot tub and began raving about the game. It was a striking moment, especially for Romero, who had spent so many years being a fan himself. Now here he was, sitting in a hot tub under giant palm trees, surrounded by a theme park, money flowing, being treated like a legend. He could deal. As their success grew, Carmack's and Romero's personalities came into even sharper contrast. Carmack sank deeper into his technology, Romero deeper into gameplay. Tom documented their differences in a hint manual he wrote for Wolfenstein 3D. He characterized Romero as the ultimate player, and Carmack, the ultimate technician, or as he put it, the surgeon and engine John. "John Romero," he wrote, "at this point in time is the world's best Wolfenstein player. His current record for getting through all of Episode 1 and Bring 'em On mode, 5 minutes, 20 seconds. That's not going for anything but the shortest, fastest path to each elevator. We call him the surgeon, after the way he surgically takes out the guys and keeps going. He welcomes all challengers to his record. John's advice? Play with a mouse and keyboard and use the up arrow and right shift to run most of the time. Don't sit and wait for the enemy to come. Charge and lay waste to them before they knew what hit them. There's no room for wimps in world-class Wolfenstein play." Further down, he described the work of Carmack, Engine John, he wrote, "We call the part of the program that actually gets the graphics onto the screen the engine. The cool, texture-mapped engine for Wolfenstein 3D was written by our resident technical super genius, John Carmack. However, he's already disgusted with the technology. He's excited about his new ideas on rendering holographic worlds." It was true. Carmack was over his previous accomplishment, just as he was over his past. Right now, the next obvious step was for him to further enrich his virtual worlds. The spirit was in the air. In May 1992, when Wolfenstein was released, an author named Neil Stephenson published a book called Snow Crash, which described an inhabitable cyberspace world called the Metaverse. Science fiction, however, wasn't inspiring Carmack's progress. It was just his science. Technology was improving. So were his skills. The opportunity to experiment came during the development of Spear of Destiny, the commercial spin-off of Wolfenstein that id was now making for FormGen. The game was named for the mythical spear used to kill Christ, an object later sought by Hitler for its supposed supernatural powers. In the game, Hitler steals the spear, and BJ must fight to win it back. FormGen's original concerns over violence had faded with Wolfenstein's success, so id was free to continue on its gory path. Because Spear of Destiny was built using the original Wolfenstein engine, Carmack could work on new technology while the rest of the guys completed the game. At first, he fiddled with countless little experiments, using art resources from existing games. He played around with making a racing game like F-Zero, the hovercraft title he played now and then with Romero. Carmack covered the floor of his computer screen with an angular blue matrix of lines. Then he started laying down images that together would make up roads. The only digital images around were big banners of Hitler from Wolfenstein. So he put those down back to back, making a highway of Hitlers surrounded by a sprawling web. Carmack could lose himself in the abstract mathematical imagery of this world, working on the acceleration of movement, the sense of speed, velocity, decline. Soon, his experiments became part of a deal for a game called Shadowcaster, an upcoming title from a small game development company named Raven. The id guys had met the owners of Raven while living in Wisconsin because they were the only other game company in town. Run by two brothers, Brian and Stephen Raphael. Raven had started making games for the Amiga game console. Romero was so impressed by their work that he wanted to co-finance their development of a PC game for Apogee. Raven turned him down, saying that they weren't interested in the PC at the time, but they stayed in touch. Now, they had a contract with Electronic Arts to make a PC game after all. id suggested a deal. Let Carmack make the engine for a cut of the profits. Everyone agreed, and Carmack got busy. Others in the office weren't quite as immersed. Everyone but Romero, it seemed, was burned out on Wolfenstein. Adrian was tired of churning out realistic Nazi images. He began hanging out more with Kevin, who was now collaborating with him. Tom, meanwhile, was getting increasingly frustrated with the design direction of the games. On occasion, he would pull Romero aside and ask him when they were going to start working on the next Keen trilogy. Romero would tell him that it was still on the table, but privately, he was getting tired of the badgering. Tom was clearly not motivated to work on Spear. Romero tried to motivate him as best as he could, telling Tom to think about the nice new Acura he was going to buy when all the money rolled in. Other times, they'd just take the easy way out, leaving their work altogether to kick-punch each other in Street Fighter 2. The more bored Tom got, the more they played, and since Tom was bored much of the time, the games were lasting longer into the night. Downstairs, Carmack was trying to focus on Shadowcaster. He was really on to something here. He could see it. The right thing. Something different unfolding on his screen. But the distractions were getting worse. After months of shutting out the paper fights and answering machine messages and assorted screams, he finally gave way. Carmack stood up and began to unplug his machine. Everyone else stopped what he was doing and watched. "I think I'm going to get more done doing this by myself in my apartment," Carmack said. He picked up his stealth black Next machine and walked out the door. He wouldn't return for weeks. When Spear of Destiny came out on September 18th, 1992, it further cemented its fame and fortune. Once again, they won the Shareware Awards for Best Entertainment Software. They were also winning continued accolades from the press as well as their peers. At the annual Computer Game Developers Conference, an executive from Electronic Arts spoke at a marketing workshop about how Wolfenstein had become such a sensation with no marketing at all. Scott Miller was the first to agree. But the orders were rolling in. The conventional wisdom at the time was that at best, 1 to 2% of the people who downloaded the shareware version would actually pay for the game. To make matters worse, there was nothing stopping someone from buying the game and simply copying it for friends. Despite all these forces, the sales continued to soar. id was getting checks totaling $150,000 per month. And the opportunities were coming in from really unlikely places. The most unlikely of all, Nintendo. Despite having turned id away when they tried to sell Nintendo on a PC version of Mario, the company had changed its tune. id was paid $100,000 to port Wolfenstein for the Super Nintendo machine. But Nintendo had one condition: tone the game down. Nintendo was a family system, and they wanted a family version of the game. This meant, first of all, getting rid of the blood. Second, they didn't like the fact that the players could shoot dogs. Why not substitute something else? Nintendo suggested, like rats. This being Nintendo, id agreed. Even more ironic was an offer from a company called Wisdom Tree, makers of religious-themed games. One day, a representative called Jay to inquire about licensing the Wolfenstein engine to make a game based on the story of Noah's Ark. They wanted a first-person 3D version in which the player was running around the Ark and hurling apples and vegetables to keep the animals in order. Jay had a good laugh. Nintendo, he knew, didn't allow any kind of religious imagery in a game, whether Satan or Noah. But Wisdom Tree had a plan of its own, putting the game out independently as a rogue title for the Super Nintendo. Jay agreed to license them the technology. For the time being, though, there was something more important to attend to: Carmack's technology. He returned to the id apartment with the results of his labors on the Shadowcaster engine. It was, everyone immediately saw, quite a leap. There were two noticeable firsts: diminished lighting and texture-mapped floors and ceilings. Diminished lighting meant that, as in real life, distant vistas would recede into shadows. In Wolfenstein, every room was brightly lit, with no variation in hue. But as any painter knows, light is what brings a picture to life. Carmack was making the world alive. For greater immersion, he had also learned how to apply textures to the floors and ceilings, as well as add variable heights to the walls. The speed was about half that of Wolfenstein, but since this was an adventure game, built on exploration, it seemed appropriate to have a steadier pace. The leaps didn't come easily to Carmack. It took a hefty amount of time for him to figure out how to just get the right perspective down for the floors. But his diligence and self-imposed isolation had paid off in a big way. He even had slopes on the floors, so his players could feel like they were running up or downhill. Kevin spent about 20 minutes just running up and over a little hill in the game. It was incredible, and it was clear it was time for id to turn this technology into their next game. With Wolfenstein and Spear of Destiny done, everyone, particularly Tom, was ready to move on to a different subject matter. The last two games had drained him. Blocky maze games and shooters were nothing like Keen, and he was anxious to return to his pet project, to finish his long-awaited third trilogy. Carmack, to his delight, seemed to go along with the idea. He even described how great it would be to see the Yorps dancing around in 3 dimensions. There was another idea on the table, too: aliens. Everyone at id was a huge fan of the sci-fi movie. They thought it would make a great game. After some research, Jay found that the rights were available. He thought they could get a deal, but then they decided against it. They didn't want some big movie company telling what they could and couldn't put in their game. The technology Carmack had come up with was way too impressive to compromise, they thought. So it was back to brainstorming. To Tom's dismay, the Keen 3D argument didn't go far. Carmack's technology was too fast and brutal for another kid's game, they all said. Tom looked to Romero, his friend and sidekick, but even he clearly didn't want to do the game. The computer bit in Romero's head flipped off for Keen. It wasn't surprising. Wolfenstein, after all, had originated with Romero, and clearly he preferred its gore to the cutesiness of Keen. Tom knew how Adrian felt. Even Carmack, who had once shown interest in Keen 3D, had moved on to another idea. Something about as far removed from Keen as possible. Demons. Carmack, of course, had a long history with demons. They were the demons of Catholic school, the demons Romero had summoned in their Dungeons & Dragons game, the demons who destroyed the D&D world. Now it was time for them to make another appearance. Here was this amazing new technology, so why not have a game about demons versus technology, Carmack said, where the player is using high-tech weapons to defeat beasts from hell. Romero loved the idea. It was something no one had done before. Kevin and Adrian agreed, snickering at the potential for sick, twisted art. something in the spirit of their favorite B movie, Evil Dead 2. In fact, they all agreed that was what the game could be like, a cross between Evil Dead 2 and Aliens. Horror and hell, blood and science. All they needed was a title. Carmack had the idea. It was taken from The Color of Money, the 1986 Martin Scorsese film in which Tom Cruise played a brash, young pool hustler. In one scene, Cruise saunters into a billiards hall carrying his favorite pool cue in a stealth black case. "What you got in there?" another player asks. Cruise smiles devilishly because he knows what fate he is about to spring upon this player. Just as Carmack thought, id had once sprung upon Softdisk, and as with this next game, they might spring upon the world. "In here?" Cruise replies, flipping the case open. Doom.